Yes, I am, because we are. Thank you very much for everyone that joined. I Love Black People, Pan-African History Call this Saturday. Welcome everyone. Feel free to introduce yourself in the comment section by saying your name, your country, and the date you joined the movement. So we are going to start our call with the first speaker, and he's going to help us with a prayer. Yes, Brother Edwin Chamba, can you hear us? You can help us with a prayer and present your report. Yes, you can unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Let's pray.
Yes.
Mwenyezi Mungu tunakushukuru kwa hali zako na baraka zako. Tunashukuru pia kwa uwezo wako. Tunakuomba kujalie heri uibariki hii movement yetu ambayo tunaifanya kwa sasa Afrika duniani iweze kuchapata mafanikio. Niwe peke yako mwerevu. Tunashukuru kwa jambo. Na wewe ndio mwenye uwezo wa kubadilisha kila kinachowezekana. Tunakuomba tufanikishie kuomba kwa uwezo wako na baraka zako. Ewe Mwenyezi Mungu, amin. Alhamdulillah.
Yes, thank you very much, Edwin Chamba. You can continue with your report. You have 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you. As you have said, now it's a report. I'll be speaking about our culture in Tanzania. My country culture is a Tanzanian. Yeah, we have so different differences. Culture, as you said, by definition, culture is a simple definition, can be a total way of life of a certain society or community. That is the definition of culture. As we say, culture includes traditional customs, arts, beliefs, values, languages, codes, institutions, tools, techniques, and some ceremonies. In general, African culture resembles in some ways and places, but in other ways, it differs to some extent, maybe in language, institutions, and techniques. For example, we may find a vernacular language spoken in West Africa, for example, Igbo language, resembles in some ways with East African Luo language, though there might be some differences within them. In Tanzania, there is about 120 tribes and approximately 52 million inhabitants living together peacefully. Of course, Tanzania is safe and a stable country. Despite of those 120 tribes living in Tanzania, we share the same cultural elements in different ways of life. The most famous tribe in Tanzania is Maasai, that leads Sukuma, Ngoni, Kuria, Jita, Bogo, Zaramo, Digo, Makonde, and many more languages to make them 120 languages. In Tanzania, Kiswahili is the main song culture element that bring all Tanzanians together in such a way. The tribe cultures are weakened in society. Swahili culture emerged from coastal regions of Dar es Salaam and Zanzibar, but also spreading to Komoro, Malawi, Mozambique, Democratic Republic of Congo, and the Swahili belongs to Bantu language family that is all over Africa. In Tanzania, due to availability of Swahili language, we have Ujamana, which is the life ideology that Tanzanians practice in their life ever since independence in 1961, which is unity and self-reliance in practical. Though this ideological life, through this ideological life, we can see some behavior of all Tanzanians in deep score focusing on the same target, because we are all using Swahili and some particular language being eliminated in societies due to availability of Swahili. So Swahili is a very, very strong language that United Tanzanians since from the British. So living in unity and sharing some economic strategies in practice is the most advantage of Jama and the life group, especially in the scope of production, consumption, purchasing, and sales that will determine the sources and the benefits of income to our community. At the same time, we have our foods that we share, food from our societies, especially due to tribal cooking activities. For example, when you go to a region, you find something which is known as matoke. Matoke is cooked banana. That is what we call matoke. And then when you go to another region, you may find also they cook matoke, and they farm in different way, maize and those matoke and etc. Is it my time over?
Yes, only 1 minute left.
Okay. Let me finish a little bit. Okay, that is all about our food. But when we go to other things, when we go to entertainment, we have the same ways of dancing, singing, and something like that. And when I move on traditional dances and practices, some we may share in other ways, but some little issues concerning dances and practice. My advice today to all who are listening to me now is we have to make sure that you invite more people to join our movement, because our movement still needs people. Yeah, you may share, or you may go to our app and download our app through www.iloveblackpeople.com. Share the app and use the app to recommend Black-owned businesses and Black-friendly businesses. Thank you so much for listening to me. I am because we are. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Brother Edwin Chamba. I am because we are. Thank you for that wonderful reporter from Tanzania.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend.
Okay. Yes, up next, we're going to have our brother Isaac Wani from South Sudan. Yes, Isaac, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you clearly.
Okay, yes, welcome. You have 5 minutes to present your report.
Oh. Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. This is Isaac from South Sudan. I'll be presenting to you some report on Afrophobia and racism, majorly in South Sudan. Majorly, as you look at our country, is the youngest country that has gotten its independence in 2011 through the north part, which is Sudan. Sorry. Okay, South Sudan is located in the East Central African part of Africa. In terms of diversity, South Sudan itself has, let me say, like 13 million people, and almost 2 million people are being displaced in the neighboring countries. And out of it, South Sudan is also culturally diverse. It has almost 64 tribes, and these tribes also exercise their different cultural beliefs and activities. most South Sudanese identify with one other on the basis of their African ethnic heritage and Christian beliefs as a defining factor that differentiate them from the northern part that is majorly the Sudan. The country, when you come to the country's demographic, as of 2020, approximately 41.6% of South Sudanese population, they are under young, which is 15 years of age, meaning majority of these are majorly, let me say, this percent is the adolescent. In the normal, it is normal for South Sudanese people to be bilingual or trilingual. English is the official, actually, the official language, but Arabic also currently is becoming also the second official language in Sudan, in South Sudan, that most of the South Sudanese are using in the big towns and cities. When you come to the ethnic and tribal diversity, South Sudan, as I said before, it has 64 tribes, different ethnic groups, and anthropologists have traditionally categorized the people and tribes of South Sudan under 6 distinct groupings. The majority of the South Sudanese population are defined as Nilotic, meaning their tribal origin traced back to the White Nile. Traced back to the White Nile. Other groups include Central Sudanic, which is Nilo-Hamite, and Bari-speak, they are Bari-speaking, and Nyak people. Each of these are defined by the host of ethnic and historical and linguistic factors. When you come to the different tribes, most of these tribes are having their different cultural beliefs and practices. They have, in terms of identification, you may find out that when you come to this tribe, they have their own ways of identifying themselves. Some of them are having face, cutting their faces. Some of them are having puncturing their ears very big. There are different ways that they identify themselves as Africans in using different marks on the bodies. And each and every tribe also have different and unique cultural practices that help them differentiate themselves from the others, especially in terms of cultural dances, dances, and their lifestyle in terms of their people. Most of them are also, majority of the South Sudanese are actual cattle keepers, and that's where they majorly depend on. They majorly feed on the milk of their cows, and also that's how they also marry.
Yes, you have 1 minute left, Brother Isaac.
Okay. Okay, when you look at South Sudan generally, the different 64 tribes, majorly as South Sudanese, we are aggressive in terms of responses and in our actions. We are aggressive, but it doesn't mean that we can easily fight. I can be aggressive to you when you respond to me negatively, or but we are kind people, we are warm, welcoming, and we are actually good in terms of communication. We have good communication, language, and fail in other countries, which are easily aggressive, but doesn't mean that we can do anything bad to people. And secondly, also, we ourselves, South Sudanese, we are, when we reach at the age of 18, most of the tribes make sure that you, as being adults, after reaching 18, you are independent. You don't depend on your family or don't depend on your parents. So that's why it makes us unique, and also we are too resilient to drought and also hunger and other conditions because of the way we are brought up. And I have nothing much to say here. what I'm recommending is that as Black Africans, as Black people, we should keep on recommending people to join this group. We should be able to bring our families, friends, neighbors to be able to join us so that we move forward as one. Thank you. This is Isaac. I love you all. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Brother Isaac Wane from South Sudan. Thank you for the wonderful report. I am because we are. We are also live on Facebook. If you're on Facebook, you have any question to ask us, you can just ask, we will go through it. Yes, up next, we're going to have our brother Kondwani Mpale from Malawi. Yes, can you hear us? Yes, Kondwani, can you hear us?
Yes, I'm hearing you.
Okay, you have 5 minutes to present your report. Welcome.
All right. Yeah, this is, first of all, let me say hello, everyone in the forum. This is Kondwani Mpale speaking from Malawi. On the topic given, Afrophobia in Malawi. Let me first of all define, by definition,
Yes, Kondwani, can you hear us? Okay, you just
hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Are you hearing me?
Yes, we can hear you.
When the topic given, in Malawi, it's commonly seen the way we treat our fellow Africans from Burundi, especially. And those whom we go, I would use the term refugees. I hope I'll be accepted. Are you hearing me, people?
Yes,
Yeah.
we can hear you.
All right. Yeah, so it's been of a negative attitude on how we treat them. We think like they have come to take away our small businesses and whatever, so much so that including the government of Malawi, we fail to show them love. As I'm talking right now, we've seen some days ago, our fellow Africans from Burundi being chased away from the country. Of course, we have seen that some Malawian nationals have been taken to prison, waiting for the United Nations General Council for Refugees to make some identification and what. But all this happens because in Malawi, we do encamp refugees expecting that we may attract donor aid, which is the colonial kind of thinking mindset that we've been having. In so doing, we've started hating our fellow Africans, thinking that they have come to take our resources, positions, and what. Instead, the best way was just to accept them and localize them in the locations the way everyone lives. Because the way we do treat our fellow Africans from other countries in Malawi, especially the refugees, it clearly shows, it clearly tells that the colonial the colonial syndrome is still dominant on us. We expect someone to make decisions for us who are the whites. That one was the first point on how Afrophobia is being portrayed in Malawi. The second one is democracy. Democracy has come with a lot of Afrophobia in Malawi in this case. The ruling party have a whole mantle of power on their head. They take the country as if it is their asset, so much so that they do whatever they want. There's been segregation in terms of resource allocation, abuse of power, so much that people from the opposition are never seen as if they're important or whatever. You see kind of fights that happens due to blind loyalty. Followers happen to fight. I mean, followers from the ruling government would be urged to fight or to harass or to do whatever they may to their fellow from the opposition side. The opposition side do not have power to respond to whatever is happening to them just because the other ones uses power. The other ones got resources. The other ones got everything at their disposal, while the opposition are just there living at the messes. Yeah, I think that's a good term. Living at the messes of the ones that are in power in the current government. That's how it's been in Malawi. Do I still have time?
Yes, only 1 minute.
Okay. The last one is on churches. On churches in this way. We should much respect seeing those that are with bigger position in churches and what, as if they are holier or what, so much that those who seem to be followers are never taken serious or anything in whatever they do. Much of how I have seen it in Malawi, it's been like that. So Afrophobia really has really affected us in a bigger way. So it's my plea to everyone in the team that we help one another to look for the solutions on how we can become one. We should take away the mindset of the colonialism they tried to insert it on us, but rather we should be one and work on a common goal, that Black people are one, and we are because you are. Thank you very much, everyone, for giving my time and for listening. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much to our brother Kontani Pali for this wonderful report. Up next, we are going to have our brother Monja Fabien from Cameroon. Monja, can you hear us? You can unmute yourself. Yes, Monja, can you hear us? Yeah, I think.
Hello.
Yeah. Okay, yes. Welcome. You have 5 minutes to present your report. We can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you from every part of Africa. I'm very impressed to be among your midst for this wonderful presentation about Africa. I love Black people. I've been listening about I will also present my our own governing us. Cameroon is a country found in Africa where we have two languages that I call that Boro language, as we all know, because our native language is the most important one. We are, we have so many tribes, which is about 250, with diversity in culture and other things. I don't know if you are getting me, Madam Yvonne.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So our country is being, we are using two languages, as I said, French and English. Since I'm from the part of, I come from the other part of the English speaking area. We all know that there is a little problem here in Cameroon because of the problem caused by our colonizer, the British and France. We have been battling with this among ourselves for close to 7 years today. I believe it is a privilege for me to come today for this presentation because I know there are other parts of Africa that they don't know that there is a problem here in Cameroon. Like Sudan is also going on with their own war, and because of this brainwash by our colonizers, by these imperialist people. My presentation will not go far detailedly by talking about the problem of my country or the description of my country, but to also pop out the problem that is disturbing Black people. And we know that every part of this country, of this continent, is war. And this war is not caused by us. It is being generated by our colonizers. And we also need to look into it very well, because I call that the other description that my others, friends, brothers from other part of the continent have been given is like an introduction. But I just want to go into detail about our main problem. We can see in Sudan, as we talk now, we can also see in Ethiopia, we can also see in Cameroon, we can see in Congo, we can see in Somali, Sudan, like I said, and other part of the country, and even Chad, as I'm talking to you. This country are unrest. There is no peace, even Nigeria. How are we going to participate with this struggle in order to stop all these things? This is one of my first questions and my presentation. And this is one of my best worries about the people of Africa. We need to look into it detailedly, and we need to focus on it in order to see, because the main problem that is affecting us is unity. We lack unity. And that is the main barrier that is really keeping us behind. We need to look into ourselves by calling ourselves together in order to bypass and focus on one direction so that Westerners will understand. Because if you look at the war that is going on in East Europe now, you will understand that many things have come into our mind, that this is the moment for us to come together. They are powerless if we can stand as one to form the United States of Africa, as it is being written in the UN, in the AU project of 2064. We can start it now. I'm very happy to be among you again, like I said, because these things worry me a lot. It is like my family problem, because if you are there, I know I am there. So we need to look critically. We need to look critically on this matter. Second, this matter is some of our leaders in Africa. Some of our leaders are power mongers, and they are coming in only for their privacy, for their problem to be solved. And we really need to understand ourselves by educating some of our leaders in order to stop power mongers. Because power mongers is one of the problems that is causing Africa to remain behind. Because when a particular leader is coming, he or she will create a problem, there will be a war in that particular country, and the economics of that country will go down. And when it goes down, there is what we call diseases, recession,
Yes,
so on.
brother. You can wrap up. You only have 1 minute left.
Okay, no problem. Thank you very much. Since I'm against time, I will just summarize everything together and then back up my message. We really need to organize ourselves, not only by talking here in this Zoom meeting, but we need to also fight the way we can also go out on social medias, like all the platform in social media, the other, so that we can also preach this this movement. We can also visit radio station, TV station, and other part. Thank you very much for this presentation. Although I have more to say, but there's no time. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Brother Monja Fabien from Cameroon. Thank you for this wonderful report. Time is not on our side. You're going to have the next speaker, Robert Wai from South Sudan. Can you hear us?
Hello?
Yes, Robert, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you so much. Good evenings and good mornings, wherever we are. This is Robert from South Sudan. Thank you for the times, and I'm going to be at least quick. Today, I'm going to do some other presentation about gender equality in South Sudan. So, as we're all aware that South Sudan is one of the youngest nation in Africa. We just got our independence recently. That was 2011 from the northern part of Sudan. So we are been also on the challenges of other things. Like South Sudan is also suffering indeed in terms of let me say in terms of political crisis. We have been seeing a lot of people have been displaced in South Sudan, others are staying in other part of the country. Actually, there is a lot of things in South Sudan, like gender equality is concerning for the women and other people also. It is too much here in South Sudan. So gender equality is shaped by the free bales and the cultural norm of the people of South Sudan, which is an harmful gender norm as a result of cultural practice that has been left women in South Sudan marginalized and even exclude from participation of any level of decision making in terms of political decisions, activities, in terms of families issues. So it is especially true in the countryside, which tended to be more traditional. So actually, women in South Sudan have a few decision making in power within the household and even in the land ownership rights. So you see, there's a lot of cases people are not giving rights. The women, they are not giving equal rights by the men in South Sudan. So they also lack access of water and livestock, so as well as loans. So all those things, they don't give women powers in terms of borrow money from other people to do their own business. They don't give them that right. So the lack of resource ownership and the land right, it is at the heart of power imbalance between men and women in South Sudan. So part of this coming down to the simple lacks of awareness. When I'm looking at this thing here, it seems like people are not good equipped with awareness on how they can share their resources or divide the resource between men and women, which is people are taking it as ideas that that is a traditional and the mindset that are harmful to women in South Sudan. So in terms of achievement, so gender equality has begun to be discussed as a priority in people of South Sudan. However, while the action toward this is well-intentioned, it has been until the recent lack of focus in terms of efforts and sustainabilities for the women. We need to have rights, equal resource, and systematic plan for lasting change, both women and men in South Sudan. So that's what I can give today. Thank you so much for the times. May God bless you.
Yes, thank you very much, Brother Robert Wari from South Sudan. Thank you for this wonderful report. Up next, we are going to have our sister, Natalia Faith. Yes, Natalia Faith, can you hear us? You can unmute yourself. Yes, Sister Natalia, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Welcome. Sister.
Yvonne, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Welcome.
All right. Good afternoon. I would love to greet you all the founders, the co-founders and ambassadors, and all the members on Pan-African Zoom today. Please dear, my network is not so good also. I have challenges today. What I have to present today is Afrobia. Afrobia in Namibia. What is Afrobia? Afrobia is also known as xenophobia, and it's also a phenomenon where individuals and groups discriminate against people of African descent. Namibia is a country in Southern Africa. There's no exception to this problem. Despite being a predominantly Black African nation, there are instances of discrimination against fellow Africans from other countries. In this report, we are also going to explore the issues of Afrobia in Namibia, its root causes, the effect of, and also impact on society and possible solution. I'll try to make it fast, Yvonne. Can you still hear me?
Yes, we can still hear you.
Can you hear me, guys?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Let me quickly touch, if you look on what that I send on the report, maybe you can, if you check there where I put the sign, we must stop xenophobia or Afrobia in Africa. Let's quickly touch on the root and the causes of Afrobia in Namibia. The main root causes of Afrobia in Namibia can be traced back to the centuries history of colonialism, apartheid, and economic struggles. Namibia was colonized by German in the late 19th century, and later by South African in the 20th century, because I have also questioned the people asking how come an African country colonized by an African country? This happened to the Boers that have been colonizing Namibia from South Africa. During this time, Black Africans were subjected to racial discrimination, exploitation, and violence. After gaining independence in 1990, Namibia still faced economic challenge, high unemployment rates, and poverty. This led to a sense of competition to scarce resources and jobs, which has fueled tension between Namibia and African immigrants. Let's quickly touch to the effects of Afrobia in Namibia. Effect of Afrobia on Namibia society. The effect of Afrobia in Namibia are detrimental of the country development and unity. Discrimination against fellow African creates a culture of fear, mistreat, and vision, and it also creates negative image of Namibia as a country that is unwelcoming to foreigners. Furthermore, it's also undermine the principle of Pan-Africanism, which seek to unite all Africans and promote solidarity among the continent's peoples. I also put up a picture there, just something to show for discriminations and how we need to unite. Pan-Africanism and its importance. The Pan-Africanism is a movement that seeks to unite all African regardless of their geographical location into a single political and cultural entity. This movement emerged in the early 20th centuries as a response to colonialism and racism. It includes prominent African leaders such as Kwame Nkrumah, Julius Nyerere, Thomas Nkrumah. These leaders, and we can also talk about Marx Garvey. These leaders understand the importance of unity among Africans in the fights against oppression and promotion of development. As you can look there, I also put up the picture of Julius Nyerere, Kwame Nkrumah, and even though I don't have for Thomas Sankara and Marx Garvey. Let's look at the possible solution to Afrobia. The combat of Afrobia in Namibia, there's need to be concerted effort to promote Pan-African and solidarity among Africans. This can be achieved through education, cultural exchange programs, and economic integration. African immigrants should be treated with respect and dignity and contribution to country development. Do I still have some more minutes, Yvonne?
Yes, 1 minute to wrap up.
1 minute, okay, thank you. Let me, our government can also play a role by enacting policies that promote inclusive and equality for all regardless of the race and nationality. Let me quickly get to the conclusion. Afrobia is a problem that affects not only Namibia, but many African countries. This can be globally. It determines the principles of Pan-Africanism and create division and mistreat among Africans. To be combat this problem, there is need to be concerned effort to promote unity, solidarity, and inclusive among Africans. As Kwame Nkrumah once said, I am not African because I was born in Africa, but because Africa was born in me. It is the sense of African identity and belonging that should guide our action toward building a better future for all Africans. Natalia reporting from Namibia. I am because we are.
Yes, thank you very much, Sister Natalia from Namibia. Thank you for this wonderful report. Up next, you're going to have our brother,
Thank you,
Shahid Kasim from Ghana. Yes, can you hear us?
Can you please unmute me?
Yes, Shahid Kasim, can you hear us?
Yes, madam, I can hear you.
We can't hear you.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Okay, now we can hear you.
Good. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Let me first of all extend my greetings to all my African contingents. It's a privilege once again to represent Ghana in this all-important program. In 1957, the Gold Coast became the first sub-Saharan colony to become an independent nation under President Kwame Nkrumah, who had led the fight for independence. Nkrumah was a Pan-African nationalist who saw Ghana's independence as crucial to the entire continent of Africa. As the Gold Coast officially gained independence, Nkrumah declared the independence of Ghana is meaningless until it is linked up to the total liberation of the African continent. He again declared that from now on, there is a new Africa in the world, and that new Africa is ready to fight its own battle.
Yes,
I show that the black man is capable of managing more than 30 and over the next decade. I hope you can hear me.
yes, we can hear you. We can hear you.
The Ghana flag incorporates the Pan-African colors of red, yellow, green, and black to represent political unity between all those who live in Africa, and features the black star as a symbol of Ghana's new freedom and hope. A democratic state. After independence, Ghana's government were plagued by corruption, coups, and military rule. For many years, Ghana was effectively a one-party state until in 1981, when Ghana's new leader, Jerry John Rawlings, vowed to put an end to this once and for all. In 1992, a new constitution was adopted, which allowed for the formation of multiple political parties and a democratic system of governance. Afrophobia in Ghana. Colonization has contributed significantly in the causes of Afrophobia in Ghana. During the colonial period, many Ghanaians were subjected to widespread exploitation, segregation, and hardship. After the country gained independence from British colonial rule, the country still faces high unemployment, poverty, and severe economic challenges. This has created unhealthy competition on the limited resources and jobs, which has sometimes creates conflict between the citizens and other African nationals. The spirit of Pan-Africanism is a necessary tool that can help combat Afrophobia in Africa. We need to have absolute control over our education system so as to instill in our youth the spirit of unity, togetherness, and equality among Africans. There is a need for Africans and Afro-descendants to reclaim ownership over the narration of our own history and revive our cultural identity to strengthen a shared aspiration to achieve African unity. Today, Ghana's president is Nana Akufo-Addo, and the country is now seen as a shining example of economic recovery and political reform. In fact, Ghana was recently ranked the second most peaceful country in Africa after Mauritius. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I am because we are.
Yes, I am because we are. Thank you very much, our brother from Ghana. We're going to have our last speaker, Justin Chungu. Yes, Justin Chungu, can you hear us? Yes, I think they're having some network issues. We are going to continue with the Pan-African healthcare class with Nana Akua.
Love to see your faces. I see Fawn and Thomas and Isaac. Same Isaac. Okay, Isaac on two screens. Okay, I see. I see you, Shahid and Nelson. All right, I think, oh, there's Shadrach. Okay, I can barely see you. So yes, thank you. And everyone else who is doing something else and can't cut on their screens, I welcome you as well. Thank you all for joining us today. I have my other monitor on, so I may be looking up, or it'll appear that I'm looking up, but I'm looking at my other screen. And I'm going to see if we can share this screen here today. It's not looking too good, but we're gonna try. We're gonna see. Oh, it's messing up already. Let me see if I can. Isn't that something? Because I took the time to, so can you see, what are you seeing on the screen? Can you see about holistic health? I don't know if Yvonne, are you looking?
Yes, holistic healing principles.
Okay, very good. So we started last week with this new cycle, and we were talking a bit about nutrition, and we got through proteins. So I want to move on today and let's talk a little bit about carbohydrates. So we know that carbohydrates is like the fuel. It provides energy, right, and fuel to the body. So same as gasoline provides fuel to a car or petrol. And we know that this is what's needed for energy, but also just for our daily movements, our activities, things that we have to do. So it helps with the development of the body so that the body can move and function, and bones and tissue and such can develop and have functionality, right? And so we know that choosing the proper carbohydrates is important. A lot of times when we are watching our weight or we have certain health issues such as diabetes or any imbalances in with our glucose, we have to be careful of our carb intake, but know that carbohydrates are an essential nutrient. It is considered a macronutrient and it is necessary. We just have to learn which types of carbohydrates to consume. And we usually discuss the glycemic index a little further in one of the latter sessions. But the best way that I know to tell you to follow consuming good carbohydrates is to learn how to identify the glycemic index in each food. If you Google glycemic index, or I think it's in packet 4, I believe, then you will have that specific information. But basically the glycemic index is a list of all foods that contain starch or carbohydrates, and it assigns a number based on how quickly it requires the or how quickly it introduces sugar into the blood, and how the body, you know, reacts to it. We want to have foods that are less than 70 in our daily diet. If you go over 70 or any food that is around 70, you really want to do that in strict moderation, and you really avoid those high glycemic foods that are over 70. But know that carbs are essential, they are necessary. You just have to know the right ones. And if we're talking about vegetables, we're talking about our green leafy vegetables, right? Or even our red or yellow vegetables. But usually our root vegetables, our starchy vegetables like our yams and potatoes and our beets and our carrots, these are going to be higher glycemic foods. So these are the foods that we would limit, right? And if we're talking about fruits, we know that the high glycemic fruits are the sweet, sweet, sweet fruits like our mangoes, sometimes our grapes, our really sweet, ripe bananas, melons, things of that nature. So really our more high fiber or low glycemic fruits are going to be things like citrus, berries, apples, pears, plums, things of that nature. So those foods we know we can eat freely, but the really sweet, sweet fruits we're going to limit and eat in moderation. If we're talking about starches in terms of grains or breads, pastas, rice, if you know that that's a part of your diet and you're going to consume that, then I think portion control is the best way to modify that. And usually the palm of your hand, right? What will fit in the palm of your hand is the limit of how much rice or pasta or grainy starch you should consume in a day. I know that may sound ridiculous because you probably eat several balls of kinky, right? So you probably eat a few handfuls of fufu or kinky, or, you know, I'm not so much a rice person, but I'm a pasta person. So I'm probably gonna have 2 or 3 bowls or 2 or 3 palmfuls of spaghetti. But really the key is not necessarily having to cut out, and that works for some people, but if it's not feasible for you to cut it out altogether, you really have to limit your intake of these types of carbohydrates. So let's move on to fats. If we're talking about fats, we know that, again, fats can be harmful if we're talking about trans fats and the fats that are void of any nutrition, but we know that dietary fats are essential nutrients and we do need them. So these are fats that are found in certain oils, from coconut, nuts, milk, cheese. It can be from meat, it can be from poultry, fish. There are many sources of the fat. It's just a matter of getting those fats that are better for you. We know that they're essential because it's needed for what we call fat soluble vitamins. These are things like vitamin A and K, E, these that need fat in the body for these vitamins to absorb and to be utilized. So fat is necessary, fat is good. It's just a matter of choosing the right fats. And so this is going to be making the decision of what types of oils to cook your foods in. I always like to share that there are high flash point oils that are better for frying. Usually these are going to be things like your coconut oil, sesame oil, grapeseed oil. If you're familiar with ghee, which is a part of the butter or you get from the butter making process, or even macadamia nut oil, which is a little pricey and not readily available, but sesame, coconut, grapeseed, we usually can find those pretty easy. These are the better oils to fry at high temperatures because they maintain their molecular structure when they're at 350 to 400 degrees, which is what we're usually frying at. All of your other oils that are low temperature oils used for sauteing and for dressings and low temperature cooking, better oils for these things would be your walnut, your safflower, your sunflower, walnut. These are better oils. Olive oil, if you like olive oil is very popular. It's not my favorite oil. I don't care so much for the flavor or the taste of it. I think they're just some better tasting oils. We know though that corn and peanut, these are more readily available usually. I just usually will shy away from a vegetable oil, which is soybean, just because soybeans are so heavily genetically modified, and we know that it's everywhere and it's so plentiful because they've done things to it to mass produce them, and I don't think that they are safe and healthy in most cases. If you're doing a soy-based product, I think it should always be specified on the package that is organic or at the very least non-GMO. But that's just the thing about fats. We know that, of course, foods like salmon, depending on how you pronounce it, or avocado, these are good sources of fats. So if you're talking about the whole foods itself, these are options for good, healthy fats or oils from foods. Let's move on to, so we did protein, we did carbs, we did fats. So let's move on to our micronutrients. These are vitamins and minerals. So we know that these are the components in foods that play a role in how our body functions, right? Neurologically, metabolically, how they give energy sources to the body, how it helps the body heal wounds, form bones, boost immunity, develop skin and tissue, muscle, all of the components. These are our vitamins and minerals that help the body to do that. So we know that we'll find these in different foods, fruits, vegetables, dairy, proteins. These are the micronutrients, the components that allow for very specific jobs in the body, right? And so, yes. So we know that each vitamin and mineral has a particular function. It has different jobs that it does naturally in the body. This chart is just a chart I pulled from the Food and Drug Administration here in the US. It gives you the function or what the nutrient does, where you can find it, and what the daily recommended value or amount is. What I find more interesting that I'd like to skip to is the herbal sources, food sources of vitamins and minerals. I find this fascinating because I know in a lot of cultures, people, you drink tea or you're using herbs, or as people, and I'm thankful for this, as people are getting more into utilizing herbs and having an interest in herbs, what I find is if you knew what vitamins and minerals are contained within the herbs, you can make a more informed decision as to what herbs you're drinking for your teas, or what herbs you're using to address whatever health concern or issue you may have. Or if you just know you need more vitamin B complex, or you know you work around a lot of people and it's cold and flu season and you need to boost your vitamin C. I find this very helpful, and I think this is a perfect way of taking control of your own health and really picking good choices of what foods and herbs to supply right into your diet. So let's do the vitamin C. So we know that garlic, comfrey, alfalfa, rose, barberry, nettle, chickweed, dandelion, elderberry, all of these are herbs that are really high in vitamin C naturally. That's how God made them. You don't have to go to the drugstore or the pharmacy or wherever you might call it, where you're from, and you don't have to go and buy a bottled, encapsulated, or pill form vitamin C. You can get natural vitamin C from these herbs. Vitamin D becomes a big issue for those of us that are not so near to the equator, right? Or perhaps don't get enough time in the sun. And because the soil is deficient of a lot of the micronutrients that we need or usually or used to have in our foods, we know that a lot of people these days are deficient in vitamin D. So your good natural herbal sources of vitamins, vitamin D is listed here: alfalfa, chickweed, eyebright, fenugreek, mullein, oat straw, thyme, red raspberry, rose, sarsaparilla, mullein. These are all excellent sources of vitamin D. So these are options for you to drink your morning tea or your after dinner tea to get sources of nutrients that you may be void of. And the list, and this list I compiled many years ago. I'm really happy about this. I think it's a little bit of out of alignment in some places, because you all know Nana, who is not that handy with the computer, but I created this, this handout many years ago because I wanted one place to just go and say, hey, what's high in calcium? What's high in manganese? Where can I get, natural iron from? If you've ever been anemic, or you have any kind of bleeding disorder, or what's common here in the States, especially, is women who have fibroid tumors or uterine fibroids, and there's excessive bleeding and blood loss, right? So then the iron is low or deficient in the body. And so, right, there's a slew of herbs that are high in iron. And this, of course, applies to other people, usually people who lack energy, or sometimes they crave ice, or get cold, or other symptoms too, to indicate you might, be iron deficient. But there's a lot of good sources here for iron as well. And even some other foods that are here, these aren't herbs, but people who eat organ meats, I do not, but liver and other organ meats are usually high in iron. Can't say I recommend that though, but molasses, dark green vegetables, these are also good sources of iron. But again, someone who's not consuming meat, who doesn't do dairy, there are good options, plant-based options, herbs that are excellent for iron, and not very hard to find. Parsley, alfalfa, chamomile, celery, dandelion, golden seal, kelp. A lot of these are thyme. These are all really easy to find herbs as well. So I wanted to highlight that. Minerals, same thing, well, iron is a mineral, but vitamins, minerals, and water is the last essential nutrient that I don't think we talked about last week. So we know that water is important because water, 2/3 of the earth and our bodies are water. And so we know that water is cleansing. We know that water is healing. We know that water lubricates, hydrates. It makes things moist and makes us more mobile, makes our bones and joints, move easier. So it helps in so many ways. We know that when we intoxicate ourselves with alcohol and other toxic foods or drugs, we know that water is flushing and cleansing and purifying and will help the body get rid of different substances. We know that water is needed to absorb certain nutrients that the body needs. So water is important. And so water, usually the rule of thumb from the natural healing world is half your weight in ounces. And those of you who are used to liters, forgive me. So if you do these kilos and what have you, you might have to do some conversion there. But how I can easily say it is,
Yes, thank you very much. That was the recording from Nana Akua. She is not currently available for the class. She sent a recording. So up next, we are going to have the Pan-African history class with Dr. Tyreen Wright. And also, I'm going to share her email in the comment section in case you would like to receive the handouts from her. Yes, Dr. Tyreen Wright, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. I'm trying to make this turn around, but okay. All right, so good morning, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to the Pan-African History and Organizing course. Take my glasses off. All right, so you had the readings today, this week, Booker T. Washington, Pan-Africanism and Pan-Africanist. And I gotta get my glasses on. It's actually this book, but you're not required to buy this book or anything like that. I actually share the chapters in this book that we are going to discuss, which are two. One we just had for this week, and that is Booker T. Washington, Pan-Africanism and Pan-Africanist. And the reason why I use this chapter is simply because what it does is give you sort of like a whirlwind tour of those who contributed to the early history of Pan-Africanism as it was developing. And that, I think, is very important because not only is it the development of Pan-Africanism, but it's very Pan-Africanist in nature, meaning the unification of African people for the purpose of eradicating oppression and exploitation, which is the bare bones definition you should have gotten from the readings. So what I mean by it is very Pan-Africanist in nature, the history is that you have many different groups of Black people, of African people in different locales who make a contribution to the development of Pan-Africanism as it's constituting itself as a concept and as the term is coined by Henry Sylvester Williams at the turn of the 20th century. So you can see, and I'm going to try to share at the same time, but there's a portion that I want to specifically revisit. And if you already have, opened it in some way, you can go to it. But on page 16 of the text, you will see how so many variables and people, proponents of Pan-Africanism, actually make a contribution. I'll read it really briefly. And if you have it open, you can follow along, but it's page 16. It's not the 16th page, but it's page 16. 16 is on the top of the page, right? So that's the number inside the book. I'm not sure what number that is in terms of pages. So maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it's 8 pages into the actual chapter. But it says prior to the first Pan-African Conference, 19th and early 20th century Pan-Africanism in the US was espoused and practiced by individuals like Bishop Henry McNeill Turner, Martin Delaney, Edward Blyden, Henry Highland Garnett, and Alexander Crummell. So those are all people who espoused early 19th century, meaning 1800s, Pan-Africanism. And so they weren't using the term, but the concept was aligned with this idea of us coming together in all kinds of locales, in various locales, to look at our condition, okay? But as early as 1829, David Walker's appeal reflected on the history of African civilization and made a connection between those in Africa and Africans scattered abroad. His appeal not only aimed to challenge the institution of slavery, but to educate the masses on African history and culture. Pan-Africanists amongst the African population in the Caribbean included the initiator of the first Pan-African Conference, Henry Sylvester Williams of Trinidad, Marcus Garvey's mentor, J. Robert Love, and Dr. J. Albert Thorne from Barbados. But decades prior to their emergence, the Haitian Revolution occurred and bolstered Pan-African consciousness in the diaspora as well. Haiti would produce Benito Sylvain and Antonio Furman, both who met Booker T. Washington in 1897 and attended the first Pan-African Conference in 1900. Out of Haiti came a wing of Pan-Africanists who created literary discourse on diasporic philosophies on Africa. The African population in Haiti produced Jean Prince Mars and Louis Joseph, who repeatedly explained that Haiti was the embodiment of the irresistible force of a united Africa. And what he meant by that is the fact that Haiti, as the first free and independent republic, free and independent meaning free and independent from the colonial regimes and free and independent from slavery, right? The diversity that existed in Haiti is the same diversity that got dispersed to the diaspora in the Western Hemisphere, meaning that you had multiple ethnicities, which were our primary identities prior to enslavement, now could be found out in the diaspora, and particularly on the island of Hispaniola, what is considered Haiti and the Dominican Republic. And so the unification of the people in the terms of the Black Republic was an expression of Pan-Africanism. You have to think about it. The people, the individual people, were ethnically different. And out of this common experience, they would emerge to fight and liberate an island that would be the first and only free African republic in the Western Hemisphere, and a stronghold against the institution of slavery. So every other country in the Western Hemisphere at that time was not only built on slavery, but had a strong institution of slavery in practice. And Haiti would be otherwise. Now, there's a lot of criticism of Haiti because of Dessalines and this whole concept of how when he fought the final war, he essentially declared, a republic, a Black republic, and said to, cut their throats and burn everything. And in terms of the white people, he consciously racialized their struggle, their revolution in the final war. And then, of course, the people criticized this because of the fact that a year or two later, he is taken out by one of his own generals, and they're saying that, this may be the racial dynamic, but I don't agree with that. I feel like, yes, the idea that at a time in the Western Hemisphere where slavery ruled, that there could be a free African republic. And I say African republic because the people were still in many ways distinctively African, right? They had not assimilated into any colonial culture except for under the institution of slavery. So culturally, they would have still been African people with a multitude of ethnicities. But this is why Louise Joseph and Jean Prince Mars assert that Haiti was the embodiment of the irresistible force of a united Africa, right? Because if you looked at it in a microcosm, it is numerous ethnicities. There are numerous ethnicities represented there, but they are unified against slavery and colonialism in the form of their revolution, which makes Haiti a stronghold. And as many of you probably already know, the idea was that whoever, whatever Black person could make it to Haiti in the hemisphere, they would be free. Okay. So Pan-Africanism also had a dialectical characteristic to it, which allowed historic events like the Haitian Revolution to produce a response and rise in consciousness amongst African people internationally. Similarly, in 1896, the Ethiopian victory over Italian imperialist forces in the Battle of Ottawa also bolstered the connection between diasporic Africans and those on the continent. The social climate and consciousness of the African diaspora in the Western Hemisphere and throughout the world produced two of the most prolific Pan-Africanists, W.E.B. Du Bois and Marcus Garvey. Each of these men had important relationships and exchanges with Booker T. Washington. Marcus Garvey's relationship with Washington would open the door, both literally and figuratively, to the first mass organization of the African world through the Universal Negro Improvement Association. However, Washington's relationship with Du Bois would be inconsequential to the progress of Pan-Africanism. The relationship between Washington, the apparent accommodationist, and Du Bois, the Pan-Africanist scholar activist, has shaped African-American social and political history in the US for at least a century. Booker T. Washington and Du Bois and Marcus Garvey would all function differently as Pan-Africanists. The methods they employed vary, but like previous Pan-Africanists, they all had one singular objective beyond unity, which was to advance the plight of African people in the face of oppression. As we move towards understanding the stages of Booker T. Washington's development as a Pan-Africanist, we revisit and define his relationship with both Du Bois and Garvey. While most focus on the contentious relationship between Washington and Du Bois, they had a 9-year friendship prior to the public break and appeared to be precipitated by Du Bois' book, The Souls of Black Folks. U.S. social and political history casts Washington and Du Bois as polar opposites, in stark contrast to each other. But that was not necessarily the case. Du Bois initiated the relationship in 1894 with a letter to Margaret Murray Washington. So I'm going to stop there. What I want to focus on in those 2 pages is the fact that, one, the collective contribution to the concept of Pan-Africanism, coined by Henry Sylvester Williams, but embodied and expressed by members of the African world in the diaspora out in the Western Hemisphere and on the continent of Africa and in Europe in particular. This culminates in the event called the First Pan-African Conference. Another point that you should understand in the context of reading this chapter, you should have a working definition of Pan-Africanism as bare bones as the unification of African people for the purpose of eradicating oppression and exploitation, meaning we come together not to have a party, not to really, do anything other than talk about and strategize around resolving our condition as oppressed and exploited people in the world. So, as I always say, and in many courses before this, if we all come together in one place physically, does that mean that that's Pan-Africanist? I'm going to answer that. It's rhetorical. No, it does not. It does not mean that we're all Pan-Africanists. It doesn't mean that it is a Pan-Africanist event. It means that we just came together. But when we come together and the sole purpose and the mission and objective is to strategize around our condition of being oppressed and exploited, that is definitively Pan-Africanist. Okay? The purpose of coming together is to remedy, to deal with our condition. So there's always, especially now, there's debates around, you know, social media and things of that nature where people are still debating, oh, these people are Pan-Africanists, these people are ADOS, these people are, you know, FBA and all of that. The truth of the matter is this: what they're calling Pan-Africanist and Pan-Africanism is really not necessarily that, okay? Pan-Africanism at the top of the list on the agenda is our condition. It's not simply an identity. Pan-Africanism, you could see it as a verb, right? It's an action, us coming together to do something that relates to our common condition. And so that's an easy way to qualify something, right? So you could easily retort or rebut that something is not Pan-Africanism because it has not focused on our condition and produced anything to remedy our condition. All right. And as the chapter goes on, I talk to you in there about Nkrumah's version of Pan-Africanism, the unification of African people under scientific socialism, you know, Du Bois' path, which is the unification of African people through organization. And he would advance that with the establishment of the Pan-African Congresses. Okay. And he also had his own method. He thought for a time that the intelligentsia of the Black race coming together to look at our condition could remedy our problem. But he also moves around ideologically and comes to realize that that's not necessarily a viable solution for us. Okay, we need all hands on deck, and intelligentsia ultimately ends up being co-opted in this country in particular, but everywhere in the world, right? So the intelligentsia in Africa, who would that be? That would be the politicians, the educated classes, and in many instances, they become the heads of state under neo-colonial regimes. So we know that this idea of like the talented 10, the intelligentsia being the sole participants and leaders of our struggle against colonialism, meaning oppression and exploitation, has not always panned well. However, out of Du Bois' thinking, he establishes the Pan-African Congresses in 1919. Okay, in 1900, it was the first Pan-African Conference with Henry Sylvester Williams as the key organizer. He is the secretary of the African Association, and he initiates the Pan-African Conference. But it is just one conference. And once it takes place and is over, by 1919, Du Bois is the sole survivor of the first Pan-African Conference. And so he actually is the key organizer of the congresses, which are conferences that are continuous, right? Later on in the course down the line, we'll be looking at the first and the fifth Pan-African Congresses resolutions, what they were demanding, and how the Fifth Pan-African Congress is actually a think tank where African leadership asserts that the total liberation of the African continent from colonialism is inevitable and it must happen, okay? Garvey notably is mentioned as one of the most prolific Pan-Africanists of his time. Interesting connection here. If you read the whole chapter, you know that Marcus Garvey, as a result of a little known conference, a lesser known conference called the International Conference on the Negro, in 1912 held at Tuskegee, Marcus Garvey, through that conference, ends up in contact with Booker T. Washington. Let me tell you the specifics really quickly, because I see that people who are aware of this have sort of, misinterpreted the facts. The International Conference on the Negro in 1912 was held on the campus of Tuskegee Institute. Marcus Garvey did not attend this conference. Instead, 8 educators from the island nation called Jamaica would attend this conference. The conference, by design, was meant to open up the 44 industries that existed in the Tuskegee Institute. They had, basically, they had shops in 44 different industries. And the idea was to share this information with members of the African world so that they could take best practices back and have sustainable African and Black communities. Garvey learns of this conference from the 8 educators upon return to Jamaica. So those 8 educators who were at the conference returned to Jamaica, and they shared this with Marcus Garvey. They also share that part of the conference resolutions was to erect a Tuskegee-like institute on the island of Jamaica, meaning an institution that would educate in academics, but also prepare people to master various industries, okay? Because if you understand how a nation is built, one has to have production. What does that nation produce, right? And that serves as revenue. That being said, Garvey is informed of the International Conference on the Negro and this marvel and this sustainable model that is the Tuskegee Institute. I would say it is an industrial and a sustainable community that masquerades as a school. That's what I would say. It was. Garvey then contacts Booker T. Washington, and they communicate and they have a relationship until Washington's death. Marcus Garvey, in his own words, writes to Washington that as a result of this, he has established an organization modeled after the Tuskegee model. Okay. Designed to have multiple industries, have captains, have people in multiple industries that can supply the needs of African and Black people. He sends this in a letter along with a pamphlet showing him how he has modeled the Universal Negro Improvement Association after the Tuskegee model. Okay, this is not speculation, this is fact. You can, if you get to that portion of the chapter in the book, you will see I give some reference to that. That being said, it is Booker T. Washington who would then invite Marcus Garvey to the United States. He would then, sorry, my cat is on my desk. He would then come to the United States. However, unfortunately, he would be 4 months too late, and Washington died 4 months before. In November of 1915, Marcus Garvey would arrive in the United States in March of 1916. And the first place he would go would be to Tuskegee to see the sustainable model, okay? He would go on to Harlem and he would establish the Universal Negro Improvement Association as an international organization. And it would be the first and unfortunately the last mass organization. Sorry, guys. The first and the last mass organization that the African world had, meaning there were more chapters of the UNIA, or let me say it another way. There's never been a larger Black nationalist or Pan-Africanist organization in the world. So we have never been more organized before or since the advent of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, established by Marcus Garvey. There were at least 47 chapters of the UNIA in the Western Hemisphere, out here in the Americas, and thousands around the world. Every dock and port where there were Black and African people, you had the presence of the Universal Negro Improvement Association. And how would it show its presence? Through the distribution of something called the Negro World. Marcus Garvey himself never mastered any other industry other than the printing press. And obviously that was sufficient in the sense that it would be the tool and the vehicle through which he organized the African world. So every dock and port where we existed, you had the presence of Garvey's paper called the Negro World. It is notably how people in Jamaica find out about the coronation of Haile Selassie, Rastafari, and begin to call themselves Rastafarians. There was no TV. There was no means to communicate something like that. They would see the coronation of Haile Selassie on the cover in full regalia of the Negro world, okay? And that begins the movement called Rastafari. That being said, all of these individuals, Washington, who is not known as a Pan-Africanist, but is arguably because of what he did in terms of policy and action, would prove to be a Pan-Africanist. Du Bois, who was the known and pronounced Pan-Africanist scholar activist, who really created the art of protest and nonviolent direct action, would also be a notable Pan-Africanist that would impact the African world. His contribution largely would be in the form of the establishment of organization, as I stated, the Pan-African Congresses. That would be his notable contribution because it would be the setting through which the highest form of Pan-Africanism would be able to express itself on the African continent. And why do I say the highest form of Pan-Africanism? I say that because you have individual proponents of Pan-Africanism who can function a certain way and assert that the unification of African people is necessary, and the way we're going to do this is to address our oppression and exploitation. So you have individual proponents, but then you have organizational expression, right? And notably, the Pan-African Conference and the Congresses would be organizational expression. I hate this notion, but it is an understanding that individuals do things, but organizations make changes, okay? So to do something in an organized fashion is far more powerful than to, embark and just go out there as a lone wolf, so to speak, and try to change the world. You want to have a vehicle through which you make change or impact circumstances and conditions. One must conform to organization. And when one can create an organization that's vision and mission is in our interest, that is a powerful vehicle they now control. That being said, the highest expression label comes from me in the sense that now you have organizational vehicles, but then now you have national vehicles. Once you are impacting the dynamics on the African continent, which is a source of power, now you are attempting to have a higher expression. So it's just like Nkrumah would say, that if the independence and the liberation of Ghana does not mean the total independence of the African continent and the unification of the African continent, then it means nothing. And those aren't his exact words, but that was very much what he meant. In other words, Ghana's liberation today and tomorrow, he says, the United States of Africa. Now, I don't necessarily agree with the United States of Africa, but I definitely agree with a unified Africa, right? We don't need any replicas of the United States. And certainly not African people. We don't need, but we certainly need a unified Africa that's unified in the best interest and around the best interest of African people. So he is saying not just individual nations liberated, but liberated nations and a unified continent is what Nkrumah is talking about. And that would be the highest expression of Pan-Africanism. And that is, and it has been, a continuous struggle and an aspiration for us, in essence. So out of that comes, out of the Pan-African Congresses, comes the Organization of African Unity. And if you remember the first video shared in the context of this course, Kwame Nkrumah attempts to lay down the history of Pan-Africanism. I'm giving you some specifics and particulars in terms of the personal relationships and the efforts on individuals and then organizations, but he does lay out the blueprint and the map. Out of the Pan-African Congresses comes the Organization of African Unity, whose sole purpose really is to bring about a unified Africa. This is some of the things we will discuss here, because we should, sort of take the temperature on where we are with this in this time and space at this moment in history. And we are not that far, in the sense that the Organization of African Unity then transformed into what is known today as the African Union, arguably serving its mission. Arguably, right? Because we know that today the African Union, or maybe you don't know, but one of the troubling things about the African Union is that in many ways it has been co-opted to not bring about this unified Africa, which would be the highest expression of Pan-Africanism. And why do I say that? I say that because 60%, the last time I checked, of the African Union's funding comes from the European Union. And yes, who are we fighting? Whose cloak of colonialism are we fighting off? We're fighting off the cloak of colonialism as per European imperialist nations, right? So how they are now the funders of this transformed organization that was meant to be a vehicle of our Pan-African expression and a tool of liberation on the continent is beyond me. But that is the present condition. And so we can discuss and debate. And in discussing and debating that, we should be assessing and qualifying things. So that is something you want to qualify when you look at an entity, an organization, such as the African Union or the Organization of African Unity. It's, which was the precursor to the African Union. If 60% of the funding comes from the European Union, who has no reason and interest in seeing a unified Africa that works in the interests of African people, because Africa overwhelmingly is exploited by Europeans and European nations, then how can it actually carry out the vision and mission of the OAU, right? How can it carry that out? All right, so we are struggling with those things, and it's a work in progress. However, the tradition of organizing around Pan-Africanism and executing on behalf of Pan-Africanism is a long one. And so you find yourself in an organization called I Love Black People in many ways that has a vision that is Pan-Africanist in nature. So it is to your benefit to understand and know that this is not the first time we are struggling for this purpose, but this is the first time that we are struggling, engaging in struggle to bring about a unified Africa and African people that serve African people's interests first and foremost in the way that we're doing it, which is through the use of technology, right? So whether it puts an extra pep in your step or additional fire under your behind, it is to your benefit to know that you are not doing something, that you're not like a fledgling or you're not a lone wolf. You are working and coming in the tradition of all of these people that I mentioned today and more, who have been on this consistent path and march toward creating a world where we are not oppressed and exploited and have all of our life chances compromised because of white supremacy and culture and colonialism. Okay, so I'm gonna stop there. I'm gonna let folks jump in and ask some questions. Please go back and read the chapter if you have not already. If you haven't already watched the films that were shared during the introduction phase of the course, where I shared the syllabus and the introduction, please go back and watch that. It's important in the sense that it allows you to understand what you're doing and why you are doing it, okay? And that is significant, okay? A lot of people, what pervades our reality is the fact that we have a lot of people doing a lot of things and they do them unconsciously. And so they serve the interest of other people. And one of the very major characteristics of a colonized people or people living under colonialism is that they are socialized to work against their best interest. Okay. And so part of engaging in ideological training and development is to make you conscious of your circumstance, conscious of what you're already doing and who you're doing it for and who and how it serves or does not serve you, right? So let me say it in a simple way. One of the scars and marks of being colonized and even previously enslaved is that people have been programmed to work against their own best interests. And so part of coming out of that is understanding that we have to move consciously, be aware of what we're doing, and those things that we are already engaging in, be aware of who that serves. Does it serve you? Does it serve someone else? Are you working against your own best interest? Very often we usually are, okay? And that is the programming as per being a colonized population. And so as we all struggle, and it's a constant struggle to rip off the cloak of colonialism, we have to be conscious of what we're doing and whose interest it serves, right? Okay, so I'm gonna look at the comments. Okay, so I have to turn this around for me to see. I don't know if that makes me upside down for you all, but hopefully not. Okay, no, it doesn't. Okay, Wilson. Oh, okay. Hi, Mohammed. Hold on. Let's see. Good morning, good morning, good morning. I see people saying hello. Curtis. Right, exactly. So yeah, so it is unacceptable that the EU actually sponsors makes the 60% contribution to 60% of the funding of the African Union comes from the European Union. That is something that I think most people don't know. And it's at least 60% because that was several years ago. This is why you can have, nations that are not even African nations in the African Union as observer nations. It's like, really? They're not African nations, but you're sitting in as observers. is very problematic, right? Wars in Africa of Africans against Africans, that root of the war be based on food and water. Let me think about that. Curtis Murphy. Not off the bat, but I mean, listen, most the conflicts on the ground in Africa, many instances that end up being exploited by the colonial regimes, have to do with herding and land rights and things of that nature. Okay. I mean, one of the things, and this is a little further ahead of where we are, but one of the main issues that we need to understand is that we are the oldest. And that was the point of me sharing the journey of man, a genetic odyssey, so that you could see how old we are as a people, right? How old Black people are, right? We are the human race. We are, in many ways, the parent people. This is, without dispute, a scientific fact, okay? That being said, we are also the oldest friends. We are the oldest foes, okay? And once colonialism and imperialist nations rear their head on the continent or invade the African continent, they exploit these relationships. So already existing conflicts, hurts, differences are exploited, right? And then, and you can, this is clearly seen in the instance of Rwanda, the Hutu and the Tutsi. There are herding rights and issues that predate the the French occupation of Rwanda, but they exploit the already existing conflicts and then create propaganda to say, you know, Hutu is like this, Tutsi is like this, and give the Tutsi, of course, political power. Right? So there's a divide and conquer, but you could see that all over the African continent. I'm just giving that one little instance, but because the world knows about what happened in Rwanda. But that is a classic formula, right? What happened in Sudan, you know, and that is touching because some of the people who are in the position of domination there in the Sudan, which leads to the formation of South Sudan, are people who would call themselves Arab because of their religious affiliation. For you and I, we might not be able to process it like that because phenotypically they are African. So they promote it or discuss it as a sort of a religious war between, you know, Islam and Christianity, when in actuality, the issue is really around herding rights. And consequently, the Arab influence is exploitative and oppressive, and you have a genocide, okay? And it is against the Black African person in that region, the person who does not identify as Arab or even Islamic, okay? So all over the African continent, you see the exploitation of already existing conflicts, because what colonialism does is, when the colonial lines are drawn, they don't have any respect of our ethnic identity, culture, and empires and nations that existed prior to their arrival. They cut right through groups of people that are the same, meaning they separate people who are the same. We could see this in the Senegambia region between Senegal and Gambia. In many instances, the Wolof run through all of those countries. They cut them in half. Now you're Gambian, you're Senegalese, okay? So they divide people who are the same and force people to together who are very different. We see this in the case of Nigeria, right? The people of Nigeria are extremely diverse, 300 million. They have a population similar to that of the United States. That being said, they have come together as a federation forced by colonial lines being drawn, and the people are extremely diverse. They are not the same people. They are ethnically diverse, linguistically diverse, religiously diverse, having both traditional African and traditional African spiritual practices, and also practicing Christianity. And some would argue in terms of the Igbos that they are very early Christians, and then some in the north, practicing Islam, the Hausa and such. That being said, this causes chaos amongst us in many instances. And it has been hard for us to wrap our heads around having common interests when those differences have been so adequately exploited. Okay, so this is sort of where we find ourselves, and we have to educate ourselves out of this idea that our longstanding conflicts and issues are going to take precedent, or are taking precedent over our common condition, which is what we deal with. And it's perfectly understandable because, part of me giving you some historical context is to make you understand that we have been here just in numerical terms. The African person has been, in the way we understand ourselves to be human right here and now, on the African continent for 200,000 to 300,000 years. Just to give you a measure of the time difference. So we have been here 200,000 to 300,000 years on the African continent, okay? It has only been in the last 500 years that the European has come out of Europe and into Africa and other places in the world and incited and exacerbated these conflicts. So think about that, 200 to 300 years, 1,000 years. And if you don't understand what that is, think about it in economic terms. $200,000 to $300,000 or whatever you want, whatever your form of currency is. Do you want that, or do you want 500? Huge difference. 500 is nothing compared to 200,000 to 300,000, right? Let me just give you an understanding of how long Europeans scientifically say they have existed in the world, meaning this phenotypically pale and white person. They have only existed for 7,000 to 8,000 years by their own standards. Okay, by their own standard, they have only existed 7,000 to 8,000 years. Now think about that, 200,000 to 300,000 years versus 7,000 to 8,000 years, single digits. Okay. They are a young group of people, really, in the world in terms of existence. In the latter part of that 7,000 to 8,000 years, you have them coming out of Europe into the rest of the world, looking for conquest, because then and now Europe was unsustainable. This is a fact. Overpopulated, unsustainable. Scientific and a social fact. Okay. With the advent of them coming out into the world, particularly, I give credit to the Iberians who create, the Iberians being the Spaniards and the Portuguese, who come out with a racial fervor, a racist and a racialized pathology as a result of having been invaded by Africans in the Iberian Peninsula and ruled by Africans for 700 to 800 years. Okay, so that would be the Moorish occupation of Spain. People say, oh, the Moors weren't Black. Yes, they were. They were Black, and they were also Islamic. So maybe that's why that confuses people. But this is, the Moors are without dispute Africans, and identifiably Black in the way that you and I are today, period. So you have this racial pathology emerging in the world about 400 to 500 years ago. And as a result of that, going into Africa, right? This is first encounters. The Portuguese are the first to go into Africa and attempt to enslave. So I say all of that to say that this is new. It's unfortunate that it's in you and I lifetime, but this is a new dilemma for us as human beings, okay? Most of the time, we have been on this earth, we haven't had to put up with that nonsense, okay? Like people coming and constructing this concept of race, cutting our borders or, imposing false borders. For most of the time on the African continent, we had conflicts, we were friends, we were foes, all of that. But I'll tell you what we didn't do, because your question sort of indicates to me that you're trying to understand the nature of our relationships prior to colonialism. And I will say this, we never crossed an ocean to initiate war. It's well documented that African people did leave the African continent and come out to the Western Hemisphere at different times. We know that, okay? We know that African people, if you just know the story of Mansa Musa, right? And how he disperses gold everywhere he goes. So we have moved to other places in the world. And of course, we know there's a distinct migratory pattern out of Africa that peoples the world. So all the world's indigenous people were Black upon arrival. That is without dispute. So that's, nothing new, right? It's just a matter of people accepting that because of the indoctrination and the pathology of racism and racial categorization, right? So my point of saying all of this is to say that we have had relationships. Most of our issues have been regional, geopolitical, in the sense that we are neighbors. And yes, neighbors fight, family fights. We are closest to each other. We are engaging each other. Conflict arises, the potential for conflict arises as soon as you have more than one person. So the introduction of two people can open the door for conflict. So conflict is a constant reality for the human existence, That being said, these conflicts, already existing conflicts, were exacerbated by colonialism and the presence of imperialist nations on the African continent, okay, meddling in our relationships with the ultimate objective to have conquest over the land, conquer land and essentially conquer and exploit the people, So I'm gonna take a couple more comments and then I'm gonna end, and if you haven't fully given the chapter, then I will, if you haven't fully read the chapter, I would give it a second read. Okay, so Curtis, to answer your question, I would think we've always had conflicts over basic things like herding rights and land and things of that nature. Even the first nation in the world, ancient Kemet, which is present day Egypt, we know that the unification of Egypt as a constituted nation came about as a result of nomes being unified. And how were these nomes, communities, unified? They were unified through war. Right? So you conquer this group of people and you absorb them, right? And as we know that Egypt, ancient Kemet was the oldest nation on earth, 3,000 years. How they come about. So war, very often you conquer and absorb that group of people into your nation. And that's typically how it has taken place on the African continent. So what's the main tenets of Rastafari movement? I am not an expert on Rastafari. I knew the early beginnings of Rastafari movement, but I don't, I'm not a Rastafari. And, you know, I will say that Rastafarianism is, or Rastafari is really sort of conforms to Christian tenets of love and things of that nature, but I'm no expert on that. I don't claim to be. Um, you know, so that's a whole interesting thing. But if to understand how Rastafari comes about is to understand that one, Marcus Garvey was the person who actually prophesied that there would be a leader from the East that would bring redemption to African people. And then you have on his paper the coronation of Haile Selassie. So the people of Jamaica associated the two and said that he is essentially King of Kings and was meant to bring, you know, redemption to African people from the East, right? Now, that is not my spiritual religious orientation, but I am a historian, and so I do know that part of the history. Okay, what is the purpose of their observations at the European nations are not in observer status in the OAU. The OAU, Organization of African Unity, is no more. It has transformed into the African Union. And yes, there are nations, I'm not even going to mention them because they're such it's a hot button issue. But there are what I would consider European nations that are in observer status in the African Union. What is the purpose? I guess to keep an eye on us. I asked the same question. I asked, why is it even allowed? Are we in observer status in the EU? I know there are Africans who work in the EU. I actually know one person who worked for the EU, but was he in observer status as representative of an African nation? No. So I don't know, it's perplexing, but what do you think? What do you think? Right? I think it speaks to the power of the pocketbook, meaning the EU gives 60% of the funding that the African Union has to it. And so, you know, whoever holds the purse strings, you know, rules, right? It's also problematic, but then you could also say, likewise, it is problematic that the African Union headquarters in Addis Ababa was the structure was a gift from the Chinese. How disturbing. And what does that mean? The African Union headquarters, a gift, multi-million, probably billion-dollar gift from the Chinese to Africa and African people. I'm not feeling comfortable with that. And I think many people who are awake to it are not comfortable with that, right? What we need to focus on is a unified Africa and a unified African community, Pan-African community that serves the interests of African people first and foremost, not last, right? There's so much that we need, materially and otherwise. We don't have time to serve anybody first. Exactly, our main priorities should be towards Africa. Nowadays, sponsorship have no significant. Nowadays, sponsorship has no significant impact. I'm not sure I understand your comment, Collins. Okay. Well said, if they sponsor EU or the World Bank. Right, you know, that's like, you know, the detractors in the meeting, you know, they're not there for the same reasons or for the same agenda, right? When we talk about the EU, I mean, the African Union and the EU. Right, I agree with you. I mean, the African Development Bank, yes. But as long as, you know, Africa is used as an extraction site, this is always going to be problematic. Okay, I see the time, I'm way over, so let me stop. I'm very happy I will be living, guys. Thanks. Thank you very much, Tinko, or I'm going to say Povo. I don't want to butcher your name. Yes, I am trying to figure out the wars got started. Well, yeah, there are so many conflicts, but you have to look at conflict as a constant, as part of the human experience and dilemma. That being said, so we'll always have conflicts, but other people exploiting our conflicts is the issue. For their best interest, for their interests. I think if war is not about food and water, it must be egos. Very often it can be about egos. And what we're dealing with on the African continent today and out in the diaspora, everywhere we are, is we're dealing with this phenomenon called, neocolonialism, which is a particular stage of imperialism. And this is the part where, the players, the actors, the agents, look like us, but advance the interest of imperialist nations, European nations, okay? So we've got to become very shrewd, and this is one of the things we'll be doing, developing ourselves to do. We have to be shrewd enough to assess things in a way where we can see what is in our hand and what is in other people's hands. We have to come to an understanding of how to qualify things. And so just on a light note, we are able to qualify that the African Union cannot necessarily work on behalf of the best interest of African people. Why? Because their funding comes from the European Union. It's not a subjective, it's not, that is a fact, right? That is an objective fact. And it's probably worse than that. That's just the last time that I checked, right? So that is something concrete. We have to understand and be able to interpret what that means, qualify that first. Can the African Union really do what is essential in carrying out the original vision and mission of the Organization of African Unity, which it was born out of? Very serious question mark there. Now, let me say something positive and then wrap this up. The things that have come about in the last let's say 17 years from 2004 to now are things that haven't existed, but it is a very slow, turtle-like motion towards the unification of the African continent, which would be a power base for every African person in the world. And that's the significance of it. That's why we seek it. And these are some of the things. Okay, there is a unified African passport. Who has it? Who has access to it? That question still exists, right? But theoretically, it's supposed to be an established unified African passport where African people on the continent can move around freely, right? Without respect to these colonial lines and borders that constitute the existing nations. That did not exist, 20 years ago, so to speak. Today, you have some regional unification of the currency in various parts of Africa. A plus. 3, you have the Pan-African Free Trade Agreement, which is an agreement amongst African nations that industries on the African continent can trade without financial penalty across borders. That is a move towards sustainability, and that is definitely a plus. Okay, so those are 3 things that were not going on 20 years ago in light of the African Union that are in existence today. Now, have they all been activated and used to the highest, exploited to the highest level to the benefit of the people? I do not know. And I think that that's something we actually can study and measure. But they weren't in existence. Those vehicles do exist now, and it is for us to push the envelope on them really actually being things that are to the benefit of African people. But to me, that's not enough, I will say. It's not enough. It's not enough. the African Union emerges in 1980 as the constituted body that is supposed to carry out the, vision and mission of Organization of African Unity. It is 2023, it's 43 years later. I want more, right? I want more. I want to see, and don't get me wrong, there's some movement by individual nations. It's the Congo, not long ago, sometime last year, made it very clear that there will not be mining by foreign nationals of certain resources in the Congo. Very major move. Okay, whoever controls the Congo and the 9 surrounding countries controls the bulk of the world's resources, which are on the equator and concentrated in Africa. Right? This is why there have been certain historical events, which I won't get to now, but they are in our future sessions. Okay, that is why individuals yes, well, I wouldn't be surprised, right? Like, I've seen all kinds of people in here taking our courses, so I wouldn't be surprised. Curtis Murphy, yeah. Are Africans serving as an observer in the G7? And here's no, we are not. African people are not serving as observers. The African Union, I wouldn't say was built by China, but the building was a gift from China. Right? The African Union is born out of the Organization of African Unity. Okay. However, I would say that, I wouldn't say it is a vehicle that is completely driven by us. Why? Because you have the European Union giving it 60% of its funding. Just very problematic. Very problematic. Okay, so no, the African Union was built by China. No, it wasn't. The African Union building, the headquarters in Addis Ababa, was a gift from the Chinese. Just to be clear, because I want you to be clear with what I'm conveying, right? And 60% of the funding in the last 5 years that I checked comes from the European Union. 60%, that's a big, great deal of money, right? Funding coming from the EU, and that is problematic. You understand? So, okay. I'm gonna leave there. Thank you all for joining us. I see, I went over my time, and so some of you aren't able to stay that long. I am, because you are. The readings, let me just say this. I post the readings typically on Monday nights, okay? Monday, but primarily Monday nights. That being said, you can check, and we will embark on the next, see the syllabus and see what's next, and we'll be embarking on that this week, okay? All right, thank you, everyone. Thank you for committing our time. No problem, Chris. Thank you for committing your time and loving African people through action. And I am because we are.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Wright, for this wonderful lecture.
Thank you.
I am because we are. Enjoy the rest of your